I've got $1.5 million saved for retirement. I want to retire when I'm 61. Will that be enough? And the obvious answer to that is it depends. Your amount of retirement savings does not directly correlate with how successful your future retirement could or could not be. There are a bunch of different determining factors that will play a significant role in answering that question. But for this video, I'm going to walk through a couple hypothetical examples and share with you the three specific areas or three specific questions you need to answer when building out your retirement plan that will give you the type of confidence you need in order to pull that retirement trigger, knowing that the next 35, 40 years of your life is going to be just fine from a financial standpoint. My name is Derek Delaney. I'm a certified financial planner, and that is the type of work I do for my clients for a living. So let's talk about the three specific questions every pre-retiree needs to ask themselves when they're trying to determine if they have enough money to retire or not. Question number one is, what is the actuarial assumption you're going to use? More commonly, how long do you think you're going to live, which directly correlates with how long the retirement plan length is going to be. Now, for many pre-retirees, I always recommend use statistical data produced by insurance companies or the IRS, because they're probably going to know a lot better on how long you think you're going to live than just you trying to guess on your own. And then use historical data points, specifically how long your parents or grandparents lived, to learn if there's longevity in your family. So understanding how long you think you're going to live is going to be a critical factor in building out your retirement plan and helping to determine if you have enough money saved now to be able to pull that retirement trigger. Question number two is you have to figure out or answer what your specific client particulars are. What is the amount of spending you're going to need for basic living expenses in retirement? What are variable expenses that could be lumpy and random from year to year that you think you're going to encounter in retirement? What type of retirement spending timeline do you think you're going to be on? Are you somebody who believes in the go-go years, slow-go years, and no-go years, the type of spending pattern that represents a smile? Or do you think you're somebody that's going to start spending here and that spending will continue to increase with inflation up into your 80s and 90s and maybe even into your 100s if you think you're going to live that long? How aggressive are you going to be with your investment portfolio early in retirement and late in retirement? What income sources do you think you're going to be able to count on in retirement? Are you somebody who has a Social Security plan already set up? Do you have rental income? What does your tax situation look like, and where do we think taxes are going to go, and what type of risks do you think you're going to experience there? So client particulars are a big bucket of assumptions that you have to make that you believe most accurately represent your future desired retirement. And those are assumptions that are always going to change, and that's why modeling future projected retirement scenarios becomes so important, because you can show how those specific client particulars could or could not affect your individual plan. And then finally, the last thing you need to consider or question you need to answer when building out your retirement plan is, what capital market assumptions do you feel are most appropriate to project your future retirement on? When I say capital market assumptions, essentially what I'm saying is, what type of rate of return experience do you think you're going to have in retirement when you think about the retirement assets you've accumulated up to this point? And for a lot of people, the three assumptions or experiences they like to plan off of are: one, historical rate of return; two, a Monte Carlo simulation that just hypothetically throws out different rates of return for different asset classes you may or may not own, and running a simulation 1,000 times based off of those different scenarios; or three, a regime-based Monte Carlo projection, which basically says the first 10 years of retirement from a rate of return standpoint, you're going to experience the same type of rates of return we've experienced in the past that are specific in economic context to where we're at today. And then if you believe in mean reversion, well then after the first 10 years of retirement, those rates of return for those specific asset classes are then going to mirror what long-term averages are. So if near term, those rate of returns are smaller, long term, because of mean reversion, those rates of return are going to increase in the future. Now that could sound like a lot, and that's why having financial planning software and having a real retirement planner who understands all this help you walk through it all and narrow down your retirement plan assumptions, capital market assumptions, and actuarial information can be so beneficial. But for time purposes, let's walk through a specific scenario for a couple in my financial planning software to show you how little changes in those specific areas can make dramatic impacts when you're talking about long-term retirement planning projections. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is Mike and Sarah. The date is 2026, January 1, 2026. Mike just turned 61, Sarah is 59, and they're going to retire on Jan 1 of 2026. They have about $2 million in assets, but more specifically, they have just under $1.5 million of investment accounts. They have $365,000 in a joint taxable account, and then Mike's got an IRA and Sarah's got a 401k. We talked about client particulars. Well, in this situation, they want to spend $125,000 a year, and they're going to have some lumpy expenses along the way, which means some years they're going to want to spend money on vacations. They're going to have term life insurance premiums they're also going to have to pay, but these expenses are not expected to last for the entirety of their retirement. And then they also have some tax considerations they're going to have to pay for as well. We talked about actuarial information earlier in the video. We believe that based off of their specific situation, Mike is going to live to 96 and Sarah is going to live to 94. And once they reach those ages, their retirement is going to end. And that would correlate to the year of 2061. And then finally, from a capital market assumption standpoint, we assume that they are going to experience a regime-based Monte Carlo rate of return experience, which means that early in retirement, they will experience the type of rate of return on their assets that we've experienced in the past during similar economic contexts, meaning from a valuation standpoint, inflation standpoint, and economic similarity standpoint. We can go back over the last 120 years and pick out different times in our economic history that mirror what we're experiencing today and pluck out those rates of return from those specific asset classes, drop them in from an investment rate of return experience for the first 10 years, and then after that 10-year experience, from a mean reversion standpoint, rates of return do better because they catch up and get back to their historical 30 to 50-year averages. So in this scenario, we're going to take out the best case scenario because that skews a little bit. But you can see here that depending on what type of rate of return experience they get, considering their client particulars and how long they think they're going to live, this is what they can expect from a account value standpoint. And another important assumption we have to add on here is that we have it built in that if things get too bad at any point in retirement, we actually have Mike and Sarah cutting their spending temporarily for a little bit of time until their financial situation can catch up and get back to a point where they can start spending normally again. And that usually happens when some sort of economic disaster strikes, like the financial crisis of 2007, 2008. But you can see here that depending on the type of rate of return scenario they will experience in retirement, they get all the way to the end of retirement. And in a median situation rate of return experience, they're going to finish life with about $596,000 in present value terms. So that gives you an idea of what type of experience you might run into in retirement given your client particulars, your actuarial assumptions, and the capital market assumptions, rate of return experience you think you're going to run into. And then finally, I will add in the best case scenario, but that is way up there. If Mike and Sarah were lucky enough to retire at a time when things just worked out fantastically from a rate of return standpoint. So you can see here, this is what their account values would break down to at the end of their plan, given the different rate of return experiences they could experience that are similar in economic context to where we're at today with a mean reversion rate of return later on in their retirement period. So the next thing we could ask ourselves is, again, what would need to change for this to look better? Well, what if instead of assuming that we're going to experience similar rate of returns that we have experienced in the past based off of similar economic context periods, what if we just think that they will experience the same type of historical rates of return that the market has produced over the last 30 to 50 years? Well, if that's the case, you can see here that things look a little bit better because they don't run into the same type of sequence of return risk that we talked about previously via that regime-based model. So rates of return were higher earlier in retirement, which is a direct reason why sequence of return risk can be so important or so critical to manage. But you can see here their median scenario goes from 529,000 in present value terms up to 921,000. So they don't find themselves in as difficult of a situation later on in retirement from an average standpoint, but the upside is not as large from the best case scenario because you're not getting those big catch-up rate of return numbers from a mean reversion standpoint later on in retirement when we're just using historical data. And then finally, the last thing I want to point out is what happens if they go, hey, we're going to reduce our spending. Instead of needing, $120,000 or $161,000 that first year in retirement, we drop that down to $122,000. Where baseline spending drops, our variable expenses are the same, and then taxes are a little bit smaller because our baseline spending is smaller, which means the money we're withdrawing out of those 401ks and IRAs are less, which means the tax liability on that is not as significant. Well, if we're able to just reduce spending, again, which is a client particular, and we look at what those different rates of return experiences could look like in a regime-based model, you can see here that median number jumps from 589,000 in the first scenario we talked about up to $3.3 million. Worst case scenario is very similar. Best case scenario is way, way higher than anything we looked at before. So it's important for people to understand that when you are trying to determine what your specific retirement chance of success is, it will be very, very dependent on the actuarial assumptions you use, the client particulars you believe are going to most represent your future retirement, and the capital market assumptions, the rate of return experience you think you're going to have. The big takeaway I want you to know is it doesn't matter how much money technically you have when you retire that is going to determine your success or not. It's going to be these three areas of planning, actuarial, client particulars, and rate of return experience assumptions that are going to have a far bigger impact on your future retirement success. So it's very important that you model each of those out, kind of like a Rubik's Cube. If you change one, how does that affect the other? And it's what I do in my practice. I call it a retirement benchmark plan, where we go through a bunch of different scenarios. We project a bunch of different things out, changing those three levers: actuarial information, client particulars, and capital market assumptions, rate of return experiences, to get to a place of confidence that we can sit down and say, hey, as best as we know, this is what we think with a high level of confidence our retirement is going to look at. And this is the platform we feel comfortable using, considering those three levers, to start making other retirement decisions based off of like tax planning and creating the investment portfolio. So if you have $1.5 million, is that enough to retire? Well, if the particulars are set to a point and those particulars take place that represent what your planning assumptions were based off of, absolutely yes. But you can't go off of just one set of assumptions. You need to broaden it out and then focus it in to find the sweet spot that provides you with enough comfort and realistic future probability of those assumptions actually taking place in those three specific areas that we talked about. If you're looking for help putting something like this together and you're looking for a problem-solving partner, somebody who specializes in retirement planning for those who have $1 to $5 million of net worth, who are hoping to retire in the next 3 to 5 years, I specialize in that type of planning. That's the sweet spot of my firm. So if you want to talk more about the work I do for clients like that, or potentially you, click on the link below, schedule time to chat, and we can talk more about the work I do and if it makes sense or fits given your financial situation, short and long term. Until that conversation, happy retirement planning.